Winding down in the BFG. We're getting down there. We've read almost the entire thing. If you can see, there's my bookmark. Okay, there's not that much left. What did we leave off with? What's happening in our story? Who can fill me in a little bit? Audrey.
They just captured all the giants and are returning to England. But the biggest one, I think,
Yep.
was hard to get because his arm was behind there. But the BFG, so he was, her barrette or something, she stung it in his leg, and the BFG tricked him so they could tie him up.
Yeah, I poked her with that brooch we talked about. Who remembers where that brooch came from? Do you remember, Tucker? Yeah, the queen gave her that brooch, and she poked him with that, and the BFG said it was a poisonous snake, and that he needed to hold his leg, and they tied him up. Yes, Raina?
So they got all the giants chained up, and then the flesh walker there was hard to get because he had one of his arms under his body.
Yeah.
So then they tried to move it, and he woke up and he was about to eat one of the soldiers, but then Sophie poked him with her whip on her chest.
Yep, with her brooch. There she is. There's Sophie with her brooch.
Then the BFG tricked him and told him it was a snake. So then he told, and then the flesh on Peter said he could still feel the snake's tooth.
Good. So what else did they bring back from Giant Country other than the giants? Who remembers? Genevieve?
It's that I don't know how many bottles of dreams it was, but
A lot of bottles of dreams, all the giants' dreams. Good.
50,000.
Yep. Thank you, Audrey, for closing that. And what else? The BFG had a sack. Do we know what's in it yet?
No.
We made some guesses, though. All right. Feeding time. Well, the giants were being captured. A tremendous bustle and hustle were going on back home in England. Every earth digger and mechanical contrivance in the country had been mobilized to dig a colossal hole in which the 9 giants were to be permanently imprisoned. 10,000 men and 10,000 machines worked ceaselessly through the night under the powerful arc lights with massive task. There's the timer. And the massive task was completed only just in time. The hole itself was about twice the size of a football field and 500 feet deep. The walls were perpendicular, and engineers had calculated that there is no way a giant could escape once he was put in it. Even if all 9 giants were to stand on each other's shoulders, the topmost giant would still be 50 feet from the top of the hole. The 9 giant carrying helicopters hovered over the massive pit. The 9 giants, one by one, were lowered to the floor, but they were still trussed up, and now came the tricky business of releasing them from their bonds. Nobody wanted to go down to do this because the moment a giant was freed, he would be sure to turn on the wretched person who freed him and gobble him up. As usual, the BFG had the answer. I has told you. So would you guys want to jump into the hole and untie the giants?
No.
I has told you before, he said. Giants is never eating other giants, so I is going down, and I shall untie them myself before you can say Jack Robinson. Or Rack Jobinson. While thousands of fascinated specters, including the queen, peered down into the pit, the BFG was lowered on a rope. One by one, he released the giants. They stood up, stretched their stiff limbs, and started leaping about in fury. Why is they putting us down in this grob-sludging hole? They shouted at the BFG. Because you was guzzling human beings, the BFG answered. I is always warning you not to do it, and you is never taking the twitchiest bit notice. In that case, the flesh lump eater bellowed, I think we is guzzling you instead. The BFG grabbed the dangling rope and was hoisted out of the pit just in time. The great bulging sack he had brought with him from Giant Country lay at the top of the pit. What's in there? The Queen asked him. The BFG put his arm onto the sack and pulled out a gigantic black and white striped object the size of a man. Snozcumbers, he cried. This is the repulsant Snozcumber, Magister, and this is all we is going to be giving these digustive giants from now on. May I taste it? The Queen asked. Don't, Magister, don't, cried the BFG. It is tasting of trog filth and pig squibble. With that, he tossed the Snozcumber down into the giants below. There's your supper, he shouted. Have a munch on that. He fished out more Snozcumbers from the sack and threw them down. The giants below howled and cursed. The BFG laughed. It serves them right, left, and center, he said. What will we feed him now that the Snozcumbers are used up? The Queen asked him. They is never being used up, Magister, the BFG answered, smiling. I is also bringing in this sack whole of bungle of Snozcumber plants, which I is giving with your permission to the royal gardener to put in the soil. Then we is having an everlasting supply of this repulsant food to feed the thirst-bloody giants on. What a clever fellow you are, the Queen said. You are not very well educated, but you're really nobody's fool. I can see that. You can try. Just a little bit left. This is about the author. This is kind of the epilogue to the story, the ending of the story. Every country in the world that had in the past been visited by the foul man-eating giant sent telegrams of congratulations and thanks to the BFG and Sophie. Kings and presidents and prime ministers and rulers of every kind showered the enormous giant, and the little girl with compliments of thank yous as well as sorts of medals and presents. The ruler of India sent the BFG a magnificent elephant, the very thing he had been wishing for all his life. The king of Arabia sent them a camel each. The Lama of Tibet sent them a llama each. Wellington sent them 100 pairs of wellies each. Panama sent them beautiful hats. The king of Sweden sent a barrelful of sweet and sour pork. Jersey sent them pullovers. There was no end to the gratitude of the world. The queen herself gave orders that a special house with a tremendous high ceilings and enormous doors should immediately be built in Windsor Great Park next to her own castle for the BFG to live in. And the pretty little cottage was put next door for Sophie. The BFG's house was to have a splendid dream-storing room with hundreds of shelves in which he could go to his beloved bottles. What is more, he was given the title of the Royal Dream Blower and was allowed to go galloping off to any place in England on any night of the year to blow his splendid fizz wizards in through the windows to sleeping children. And letters poured into the house by the million from children begging him to pay him a visit. Meanwhile, the tourists from all over the globe came flocking to gaze upon the wonder of the 9 horrendous man-eating giants in the great pit. They came especially at feeding time when the Snozcumbers were being thrown down to them by the keeper, and it was a pleasure to listen to the howls and groans of horror coming from the pit as the giants began to chew upon the filthiest tasting vegetables on earth. All right, there we go. Okay. There was only one disaster. 3 silly men had decided to climb over the high fence surrounding the pit, and of course they fell in. There were yells of delight from the giants below, followed by the crunching of bones. The head keeper immediately put up a big notice on the fence saying, "It is forbidden to feed the giants." And after that, there were no more disasters. The BFG had expressed a wish to learn how to speak properly, and Sophie herself, who loved him for as much as she would a father, volunteered to give him lessons every day. She even taught him how to spell and write sentences, and he turned out to be a splendid, intelligent pupil. In his spare time, he read books. He became a tremendous reader. He read all of Charles Dickens, for whom he had no longer called dolls chickens, and all of Shakespeare and literally thousands of other books. He had also started to write essays about his own past life. When Sophie read some of them, she said, "These are very good. I think perhaps you one day could become a real writer." "Oh, I would love that," cried the BFG. "Would you think I could?" "I know you could," Sophie said. "Why don't you start by writing a book about you and me?" "Very well," the BFG said. "I'll give it a try." So he did. He worked hard on it, and in the end, he completed it. Rather shyly, he showed it to the Queen. The Queen read it aloud to her grandchildren. Then the Queen said, "I think we ought to get this book printed properly and published so that other children can read it." This was arranged, but because the BFG was a very modest giant, he wouldn't put his own name on it. He used somebody else's name instead. And where, you might ask, is this book the BFG wrote? It's right here, and you finished reading it. There we go. And there's a picture of Roald Dahl right there, the author of the book.
He does look like the BFG.
All right.